bring it to this bar.
Hey everybody, my name's Mike. People call me Bees. I make music as the Killer Bee Relay Team. Short story, I've been making electronic music for 30 or so years, both by myself and with others. I have a couple of modular synthesis related companies that I work with, Modular Synthesis and Modular Corporation. So I play the stuff and I build the stuff. I also do a lot of live streaming on Twitch, and part of what I try to do is anti-gatekeeping, breaking down barriers. Parks Department brought me in today to just kind of give an overview of some of the absolute basics of modular synthesis. Some of you I recognize, I've played shows with a lot of you, so this is going to be old news for some people and new news for some people. So feel free to ask questions, make comments, tell me I'm wrong, tell me how wonderful I am, whatever it is you want to do. I'll just go through some of the quick basics and yeah, we'll take it from there. So who here has never touched a synthesizer at all before, really? All right, great. Well, we can start off with kind of the simplest part of what's called subtractive synthesis, or just making sounds from simple waveforms. And that's talking about the different shapes of sound waveforms that are commonly used for synthesizers and what they might sound like. So I have my little oscilloscope running right here, and you see what you may remember from math class as a sine wave, which just kind of goes up and down in its own up and down kind of way. And these speakers aside, it sounds kind of like a smooth sound, very even. Because we're running at audio rates, it's getting a little bit prettier, let's say. You've also got the triangle waveform, which, believe it or not, looks kind of like a triangle. And that one just kind of goes up and down. And it's sounding the exact same here for some reason. I blame my speakers. I find that this sound, they use it a lot in video games in the 80s and 90s. You get a lot of triangle waveforms. Zelda music has a lot of triangles in it. By comparison, we have the saw wave, which is a little bit more smooth and a little less aggressive. And instead of going up and down in a triangle shape, you can see it's kind of more of like a saw shape. So it goes straight up and then gradually down instead of gradually up and down. And this sounds a little bit more aggressive, almost like a fly, like a saw even. And then lastly, we're going to look at the square wave. Which is really just turning on and off over and over again as quickly as possible. And you'll get that as your basis for a lot of bass synthesis, like the TB303, that 303 sound that everybody loves is kind of based around that square wave. It's also really useful for tuning because you have such a large definition between individual waveforms. All right, so you have a waveform. What do you do from there? Let's say we just start this off with this square wave because I like square waves. I should preface this by saying this module here that is making these oscillations going back and forth is, as you probably imagine called an oscillator. But what makes this good for synthesis is that that oscillator can be controlled by voltage. So I can put something into it that allows me to change the pitch. Generally, this is done through either a sequencer module or something like what I have set up here. This is just, as fancy as the OP one is, I'm really just using this as a MIDI controller so that I can play notes. I have a module that I plug this into via USB, and it translates those key presses to a voltage. And then that voltage tells the notes to go up or down. That's how you make music, that's it. Okay, there's more. So that's the simplest way to do it, but obviously there's more to music than just tones. You need to create some sort of separation between those notes. To do that, you would use something that is abbreviated as a VCA. Now, what that actually stands for, people will argue about all day long. Some people say it's a voltage-controlled amplifier because the voltage will bring the volume of your audio up. In my opinion, it's actually a voltage-controlled attenuator because it brings the volume of what you're doing down unless you tell it to do otherwise. In any case, that's what this thing right here is, and all of its low resolution glory right there. This is a module made by the Mega Modular Corporation. It's called the Mailroom because it generates envelopes, and I'll show you what that's like here. Right? It's a good show. So now we take that waveform that we were just listening to and do the copy. So now, when I press a key here, it gives us this voltage, which runs into this VCO telling us what note to play. And it triggers this voltage-controlled attenuator, telling us to open and close and let that note through. Now the cool thing about this, and the reason it's called an envelope generator, is because you can use something like this to actually shape the sound itself. This is done through attack, decay, sustain, and release, what's usually called just an ADSR. The attack is how long your note takes to reach its peak. So, with no attack, your note's just a play. With a little bit of attack, you can hear that the note more slowly opens itself up. The longer attack. You can hear that slower opening. The decay works the same way, but in the opposite direction. So it adds to the end of the note. So you can just hit once and kind of let it ring out. In the middle here, you have decay and sustain. Decay is the drop-off point after, is the drop-off point after the note first hits. So it allows you to create a sound that hits hard and then backs off a little bit. Like a percussion instrument, like if you struck a bell with a stick. And then the sustain is how loud that note is afterwards. That allows you to further shape the sounds that you're making. Like that use of that triangle wave almost sounds like a saxophone because of the shape of the sound. So then where do we go from there? What can you do to give this sound a little bit more character, let's say? At that point, you would add what's referred to as a filter. And those filters can be thought of like maybe as like a guitar effect pedal or just really a way to process that sound. Most of them are using either a high pass or a low pass or a band pass filter, which in its simplest form just means a high pass filter, you set a point and then all the frequencies that are higher make it through. A low pass filter, you set a point, all the frequencies that are lower make it through. And then a band pass filter, you set a little specific range and it'll just let that specific range go through. Using filters is a way to make everything a little bit more musical. It adds some depth and more color to the timbre, to the actual sound of the instrument. So I really like this filter called Marsupial. It's made by a company called Synth. It's a one-guy operation out of upstate New York. They make really fun things. And they can do all sorts of fun things to control that. I enjoy having it controlled by the same envelope that's shaping the sound. I'm partial to delay myself. So that's a pretty simple, basic overview of what's kind of referred to as the East Coast style of synthesis. It comes from way, way, way back in the day when there were only two guys making synthesizers. And you had Moog on the East Coast, who was very into making something that's like a playable musical instrument, like a piano, where you could hit the keys and sounds would come out. Whereas Don Buchla on the West Coast was more into just like, this machine makes electricity and makes crazy noises. This is more of an East Coast thing because I think it's more accessible. I think people are more used to looking at things from a musical standpoint. So that's the basic of East Coast tonal sound creation. Does anybody have any questions at this point or anything? Cool, all right, I think I have a couple more.
Yeah,
sure.
What, if someone wanted to get started with the Euro rack, what are the sort of like basic elements that they would need?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Because I got stuck there in the beginning of what
I think it's different for the individual because it really depends on what you are looking for out of your rack. Because there are so many different directions that you can go on something like this. I have people that are very East Coast oriented. I have a friend in New York who plays in bar bands, and he's a piano player and a keyboard player, and his modular is set up just to play cool synthesizer sounds, very East Coast, very kind of standard, piano-based stuff. He also has a separate rack set up just as a mixer, because he really likes the modular way of mixing. In general, I think starting with something that's semi-modular, something that kind of functions on its own, and then you can add to it as needed is really good. Or if you can, a lot of companies offer what they would call like a system. That's how I started, is a company out of Pittsburgh called, believe it or not, Pittsburgh Modular, created something called the System 10.1. And it's a box about this big, and it has a few modules in it, and you can plug your MIDI keyboard into it, and you can play notes, and it has a filter, and it has a VCA, and it has everything that you need for a VCO, and it's a really good way to just get started off with making sounds. But in the end, I think it's really just, what are you missing from the gear that you have now, and kind of trying to fill in those blanks.
Yeah, it's hard because there's so many choices.
There are, and there are more and more choices every single day. Not a day goes by that I do not see a new module that I had not heard of, that somebody just came out with. And that's another cool thing about this, is that there are companies at every level and at every style making this sort of stuff. You have, your big companies like Behringer who are cranking out stuff in factories, but then you have a lot of small 1 or 2 person operations that are, just making maybe 50 copies of something that, they're making for their friends or whatever.
Yeah. So the way that you were explaining things is sort of the traditional way a synthesizer works. You have an oscillator and a little filter.
Yeah, like your standard East Coast voice.
Do you use your stuff in unorthodox ways?
Oh yeah, that's really the absolute basics. But when it comes to everything that's going on here, the only real rule is that you don't plug any output into another output, because sometimes that makes your things release the magic smoke that's inside and they won't work anymore. But otherwise, it's all just electricity. So, I can take something like this and say, take that tonal part that I was using and throw it into a multiple, which is a module that just makes copies of the voltage and keeps them, what's the word I'm looking for here? Keeps them in tune with each other, let's say. You don't lose any of the voltage. So if somebody say run this here, run that here. There. Patch this in here. So Sounds a little weird. But now I'm taking that input voltage here and using it to control the filter. I'm using it to control harmonics of the actual VCO itself. Now, it kind of reminds me of those noisemaker keychains used to get like back in the 80s. So yeah, there are a lot of different ways to patch. What I was showing is really just like the most vanilla.
Well, what do you like about this compared to like standard synthesizers?
I am not a piano player. I'm not a keyboard player. I started off as a drummer, and as a technology guy, I always as a kid, I would break things and would not want to get in trouble, so then I'd have to learn how to fix them. So just from that and a technology and a programming, like a physical programming way as opposed to like a computer programming way. I don't like working with computers very much, so this is a way for me to kind of almost build my own computers with logic and stuff here. It's also really good for experimentation. I like to use the FAFO method to learn. So I, let's say, futz around and find out, and modular is really, really good for that. Like you can lose entire lifetimes just to try to figure out what all these things do. So, and traditional synthesizers are great. I definitely have some more traditional desktop hardware synths, but I just think that this is more fun. There's also a lot of variation. I know dozens of people with modular racks, and none of us have the same stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's good for that too.
Sure.
Anybody else? Yeah. Did you were first? Oh, he said you can go ahead.
I got a question about noise filters. I was
Yeah.
I was watching something on and they were talking about different kinds of noise,
Mhm.
like different color noises or something.
Yeah, so there are different, I actually think I have two different noise generators in here that might be able to show this. There are different colors of noise depending on how it's filtered. There's the white noise that everybody knows that kind of sounds like static. There's pink noise, which has a little bit more of a high end to it. And then there's blue noise, which maybe has a little bit more low end in it, but if I see how these little speakers handle it. I have two noise sources set up here. One of them is white and the other is pink. Oh, yeah, it's not like that. Yeah, there we go. So, these speakers not being the best reproducer for something so nuanced, you can kind of hear this has more blue and has a little bit more low end. That one's a little bit pinker, has a little bit more high end. So when it comes to noise filtering, you're generally trying to get whatever frequencies are going to stick out there, out of there. Is that answer your
And then
question?
how would you use that, like would you filter like
Oh, like how do I use noise?
a wave through the noise, or would you take?
So are you asking us generally like how would I use noise in modular?
Yeah.
Unnoise it.
Or how to use the noises. So there's one module in here that I actually designed and built completely myself, and that's this one here, the Soda Press, which is a noise generating module. I can use this. Just send the trigger to it. And what I found is that I like to use noise as like a percussive sound. I like to use it for hi-hats and cymbals. And I found that I was always patching the same modules together. I would need a noise source to generate the noise. I would need a VCA, like we talked about, to shape the sound. And I would need an envelope to actually create that shape. So my buddy and I put this all together into one module. So that's really just a tiny little hit of noise. That sounds a bit percussive when you can actually add an envelope to it and do a little bit of filtering. Now this noise specifically is kind of the same circuit that Roland used for the TR-909 hi-hat and snare. It's basically mistreating a transistor to make it get very mad, and when a transistor gets mad, it does that. So that's how I would use noise. This is my hi-hat and my cymbal and everything that I do these days.
Would you run that through your step sequencer, or?
Yeah, I would take this step sequencer here, which is made by, some would say the original Eurorec maker, Belfer. And let's clap that. This module here is great. It just, whatever you punch in here, gives you triggers out there. So you could use something like this to give you kind of a traditional drum beat. Yeah. So it's kind of like a traditional. It's kind of a traditional drum thing there. And then you had a question back there.
Yeah. I feel like you've been talking about this broadly, but I'm curious, like, how do you determine where the cables go? Like, is there a certain order, or like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's really just a matter of trying to figure out which way you want the electricity going. So for here, I kind of built things in a specific order just because that's what I had in mind, but it just comes down to your own personal workflow and what you're trying to execute. Like, I normally would probably start with something on the drum end of things, get that squared away, and then start working on the tonal stuff later. But really experience, I guess, and just getting to know your modules, you kind of know what goes where.
Okay.
Do you want to explain the difference between like control voltage and audio?
Do I?
I think in my mind, those are the two that don't mix, right?
Well, they don't necessarily. So audio, again, this is all voltage. So you think about everything, you're plugging in cables, you plug your headphones into something, if you have old headphones that still plug in. And you're carrying that voltage through as audio. Audio voltage moves very fast. You'll hear people mention audio rate, and that's because things are refreshing very quickly, which is different than those waveforms I was showing that are moving very slowly. That said, you can use audio in the same way you would use control voltage. It just might not do what you're expecting it to do. So I kind of interchange the two of them. Like I have, for example, I have a switch here that's made by a company called High Labs, which is out of Sleepy Hollow, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. This is a switch that just switches you back and forth between two inputs, but it's a switch that's capable of moving at audio rates. So you can actually run an audio signal into it and it'll switch back and forth like thousands of times per second.
Mm-hmm.
So really, control voltage is generally used to make audio happen, and then you send the audio out, but I use the two interchangeably. Yes?
This is like super basic. So does each module have a bunch of just electrical outputs, and then I can plug them into like any one and just experiment with like?
Yeah,
Okay.
generally speaking, it varies from module to module, but most of them will have some sort of CV or control voltage input, and then some sort of output,
Yeah.
where it's either outputting audio or a modification of that voltage. I have one here that's an arpeggiator, so I can send a root node into it and build sequences of notes off of it based on whatever kind of other stimulation I set.
So it's similar to like on a regular synthesizer, the button you're pressing is sending a thing, and this is just like an open button.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
just like a regular synthesizer, except all of the parts and connections that are going inside of your regular synthesizer are on the outside, and you can wire them together yourself. But otherwise, all the principles are all still exactly the same. Yeah.
Did you buy those as kits and put them together, or were they already like pre-made modules?
Both. There's a huge DIY scene in modular. A lot of the makers started off as DIYers themselves. A lot of what's in this rack is just stuff where somebody made one for themselves and then told a couple of friends about it, and then they wanted them to make more. So a lot of these companies are available as DIY. Some of them are only available as pre-built. It really just depends on the maker. The fun thing about the pre-built stuff is that you can make modifications to other people's circuits and kind of make them more your own, which is a lot of fun. Yes?
You didn't mention that you do it, but I know you make your own cables. What prompted you to start selling
Yes,
cables?
so Highline Synthesis, we do have our own cables. It just came from buying a bunch of cables, finding out what I did and didn't like about the cables that I was using. Like if you knew how many different materials and connectors I tried before settling on these TPE cables with the slim lines, with the little debossed logos on them. It came from, I go to a synthesizer convention outside of Chicago called NobCon every year, and the first year I went, I was worried about people accidentally taking my patch cables, so I got some heat shrink tubing with my logo on it and put them on the ends. I still have a couple of those. And then I started talking to my other synth friends. We're all part of an organization called the Golden Shrimp Guild, which is a group of synthesizer-focused live streamers who stream on Twitch. So we all get together at this convention. We also just started talking about what we liked about the cables we had and what we didn't like about the cables. Things like color. The cables that I make, the cable itself and the ends are two different colors. I think it makes them easier to track within your rack. The way they droop, I like this material because it's floppy. Some of these other cables you can see are like kind of rigid. So things like that came into play, and then just got to the point where we all said this would be the right cable. And then I made 1,000, and then I made 1,000 more, and now I'm living in my own personal hell of cable inventory. So yeah, that's kind of what brought that. I needed more cables, and I wanted them just how I wanted them.
A follow-up question, and this is something that everybody starts out, you probably started out the same way, one rack,
Yep.
and then, oh, you want this one extra module, you don't have any empty spaces. How hard is it to resist just adding, because then you end up on my Hunter, you have this like giant system, right?
And that's
what I'm afraid, because, I mean, little modules like, it's like crack, it's $100. This one, and,
right. And then suddenly you're out of space, and you
Right,
go,
so what's been your experience?
my experience is that it's a struggle. The fact that modules aren't free is very helpful. I do need to purchase groceries and pay my mortgage, so I can't have all of the modules that I want. That said, this is a pared down version of what I was using maybe 5 or 6 months ago. It was maybe 2 or 3 times this much. And I found that when I was playing, I was just getting overwhelmed. Running some decision paralysis. So that helped me to pare it down to this. What I found is that there's no way out of it. You're just going to keep getting more and more modules. The joke is like, oh, my buddy just finished building his rack. He doesn't need anything else. Because that never happens. There's just constantly more stuff coming out. You're going to find, oh, I know I really like this delay that I have, but this one's a little bit different. It does this other thing. So just self-control if you have it.
Yeah, see, I haven't did my footage, but I did buy a ticket for that Mode Foundation
Oh, yeah.
$24,000.
Yeah,
you know,
if you try to win
system.
that,
And
that's a good way to
that
do
might
it.
hold me for a while if I win that.
And what got me into it is that I bought a vintage snare drum at a yard sale for $10. Went home and looked it up and it was worth $1,000. And I immediately sold it on Reverb and then bought a modular set. And I've just kind of slowly been building on it from there. A lot of people also like to work with multiple smaller cases that are sort of specialized. And that can help people keep everything pared down. Like, this is my case that I use for logic and modulation. And this one is just drums. And this one I use for tonal parts. And that kind of helps people say, well, this is my tonal part case and I don't have any space left. So I have to make some decisions. But really, the only right answer is build an extra wing onto your house and start filling it.
That's what you're maybe a lot more hesitant, because I do have a pile of synths, right? I'm probably on a keyboard player, but you know, you're saying you pare things down. When I go play live, I have 2 things and a laptop, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, 2 keyboards. I'm not bringing a Rick Wakeman setup.
Right.
You know.
And I did that, I was playing shows for a while and I had a case that was about this much wider and had 4 more rows of stuff in it, and it was just way too much to carry around. I got nervous driving like on the Jersey Turnpike with this giant thing in the back of my car and like real slow in the right lane. So this is, at this point, what I'm using as my performance case. It's all my favorite stuff, it's all the stuff that we want to patch on the fly best. But there are things in here that I miss. Like I have a module that lets you generate voltage from a Wii balance board. So you can stand on the balance board and depending on which direction you're leaning, it sends more voltage out in that direction. And like, really wish I had that in here for today. I just don't have space for it. It's called the Biggest Foot, if anybody out there is looking for it. It's made by a company called Swamp Flux out of North Carolina. Well, I've used those. Anybody else?
Another question.
Yes.
So is the way they're powered kind of standardized? Like, could I take out one of those modules and replace it with some other module that's the same size and it would just work?
Absolutely. So behind all of this are power ribbons and power bus boards, and they all have the same kind of connector. So you have these 2 power inputs that I have running from that power strip over there. Each of those powers a whole half of this case. So on the inside, and I can open this up and show you if you want, once we're done here. Every one of these has the same kind of ribbon cable, and they all plug into a larger ribbon cable on the inside. So you can absolutely flip it off, pull a module out, throw another module in its place.
So I don't have to worry about like this one being powered by 6 volts and this one powered by 9 volts?
No, they all run on generally 12 volts.
Okay.
The connectors have 12 and 5 volt connections in them, but they're all generally 12 volts. So unless you plug the power cable in backwards, which as a modular manufacturer, I can tell you we go out of our way to make it really hard to do that. But if you, otherwise you can just kind of swap them around as you need to. Anybody else?
Have you sold any modules or do you just keep everything?
I do have to sell modules so that I can buy new modules. I have friends that are never sell people, and I lust after gear too much for that.
Yeah.
So there's a constant state of flux. I have 10 or 15 modules up on Reverb right now that I'm like, I'm not using them enough.
Yeah.
They deserve a better home.
Yeah.
Or I'm using this too much and I find that I'm leaning on it and using it as a crutch. Like I mentioned being a drummer and I have a module that will automatically generate African influenced drum beats based on the voltages that you send to it, and it was great, but for the 6 months I had it, I did not program my own drum beat the entire time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I cannot have this. I need to give this to someone else who needs it more. So yeah, I buy and I sell, and I've definitely bought things and sold them and regretted it, and then bought them back, which is why I always recommend swapping and selling with your friends.
Yeah.
Because they can say like, hey, do you still have that contour that I showed you 2 years ago, and are you using it? And then they can get it back to you.
Yeah. I also think there's like a learning curve because there's so much out there that you buy a bunch of stuff and then you learn like what makes sense for you, and then you can potentially like pull it back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now you're saying you have this performance case because that's like the instrument that speaks to you.
Right. And there's also the fact that there are so many makers and so many new modules coming out that you might have something. I had a bass drum called the Asteroid that I loved for a while. Pretty no frills, and then I learned about this other one. I get rid of the old one, get the new one, and I'm sure there'll be some, I don't know, anybody will come up with a better kick drum than the backing ramp. But at some point someone might, and I will have to, make that change again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking on the power thing, how come all manufacturers aren't using like the keyed header?
Cost.
That's what I figured.
It's the keyed headers are more expensive, and generally when you're having it manufactured in a factory, they can't attach those key so when you have your circuit boards manufactured, you can have a lot of the smaller components pre-populated, so that you only have to add like the jacks and the knobs and stuff once you get it back here. Those headers, the shrouded ones, you have to solder by hand, so it's just an expense thing. Though to counteract that, a lot of makers now are creating both ways modules where you can't plug the power ribbon in the wrong way. It has circuitry built in to make sure that everything flows in the right direction. So
Yeah, they're great.
they're really good. I'm a big shrouded headers guy. I won't worry without them, especially on the bus boards on the inside, the unshrouded ones. No, that's bad. Yeah.
Can you play the battery ramp?
Yeah, for sure.
We're in the distortion module too.
So this is the battery ramp kick. It has drive control, decay control, click control. That kind of tells you how much attack it has. And pitch control. And overdrive. So you can get like a nice gnarly gabber kick out of it. Or something a lot softer. These speakers don't do much justice, they're not very good for bass. These are kind of like
Do you have like an envelope PCA on the kick too? Or
no, this is just 100% by itself.
Yeah.
It has its own decay and click, which is probably the also decay built into it, with CV control over all of that as well. That's the battery ramp. And that's made by Shadow. Anybody else? Well, thanks everybody for listening and for asking questions. Find me on the internet and ask more questions. I love talking about this to a fault. So I don't want to corner you and keep talking to you about it. But yeah, feel free to come over, play around with this, ask questions, whatever.